I want to get that legal analysis that we promised. The criminal defense attorney, Brian Claypool, joining in on the conversation now with the breaking news now from the courtroom, as Laura Engel reported, this note that the jury has sent in, Brian, in the Daniel Penny case, having to do with causation, and they want more information. What does that tell you?
Hey, Connell, great to see you. Yeah, Laura's right, and Joanne's right, too. I think both those questions lend itself to this jury considering acquitting Daniel Penny. Think about it, Connell. If they didn't think that Penny was justified at all in his actions, they wouldn't be asking for a definition of justification. And then I think this case hinges on causation. That's been my take the entire time in this case. What do I mean by that? When you prosecute for second-degree murder, or in this case, negligent homicide, Connell, you have to prove more than Daniel Penny intended to harm Jordan Neely, or he was careless and reckless. It's got to be more than that. You got to go one step further and prove that carelessness, recklessness was a substantial factor in bringing about the death of Jordan Neely. That's the definition of causation. And I think the defense has done a really good job in this case, especially with their medical examiner coming in and saying, look, Neely had other conditions. He had schizophrenia. He had a sickle cell condition that also, and then the K2 that Joanne mentioned. He had all of these other factors that intervened that caused Jordan Neely's death, and that the chokehold alone would not have caused the death. And that's really what this case is going to boil down to. And this jury's got to decide, were the actions of Daniel Penny the legal cause of Jordan Neely's death?
And now, just to read what the jury actually said, Laura reported this, but we, the jury, request a reading of jury instructions, Part 2, explanation of the law that applies to the part which is justification and defines causation. And Brian was explaining what causation is. You know, it's interesting because we kind of started the show with this broad question into how a lot of people are seeing this case. I mean, is he a good Samaritan, or is he, a vigilante that acted in a way that caused the death of another person? But, they're asking about causation, but if he was the reason Jordan Neely died, right, then they will find him guilty, correct? Rather, even if they think it's justified, or is that not correct?
Well, yeah. Justification, I believe justification, I haven't seen the exact jury instruction, but justification to me means that Penny, it's almost like a self-defense argument that somehow he was permitted to intervene and protect both himself and other patrons on the subway. If a jury finds that Penny is justified in his behavior, then then he's acquitted. You don't get then to the second issue of causation, right? He's off.
So, right, so if you don't get past that first part, then you don't have to worry about causation. I was curious about that and the way it would work.
Right, if this jury, that's a great point. If the jury finds Penny's legally justified in defending himself or others on the subway because of grave imminent harm to everybody, then he's acquitted. If the jury finds him not justified, then they've got to go to two other questions. Was Penny careless and reckless, and did that cause the death of Jordan Neely? And remember, Connell, in this case, and I think this is going to be important for the jury, his defense lawyer said that it took 7 minutes for police to arrive, and when the subway stopped, Neely was still alive. That's critical. And then it took 20 minutes for paramedics to arrive. So Penny's lawyers are arguing these are intervening factors out of our control that contributed to the death of Jordan Neely, and therefore prosecution can't prove causation. That's what they're arguing.
Okay, and now his training, I mentioned this earlier, has come up because, he's a Marine veteran, so he's in the Marines, so they say, well, on the one hand, he should have known, what was going to happen if you use this chokehold. And his defense lawyer's been saying, well, it wasn't really a chokehold, it was more of a civilian restraint that he did know. And I'll put up the defense on his military background. They say Daniel Penny was the one who moved to protect them. Why? Well, because he had something others did not, meaning others on the train, something unique to him, his training. So both sides are talking, right, about the training. How does it play into it, if at all, do you think, for the jury, the fact that he was a Marine?
Oh, I think this is beyond profound for the defense. Why? Because as Joanne said, we live in a world, Connell, where people, especially here in Southern California, hardly anybody jumps in to intervene. I've had cases, kids getting beaten up and pummeled in bathrooms at schools, and people are videotaping them. Nobody's jumping in to help. We had a case out here last year, a woman working in a furniture store in West LA, and a homeless person walks in and ends up pulling a knife out of his coat and murders her. So we live in dangerous times. And the fact that you have a defendant here who happened to be trained to protect people in the Marines, was that just coincidence, or was that a spiritual intervention? And I think what's also important, Connell, is that the defense medical examiner testified that he didn't think that Penny was doing a real chokehold, that it was not a chokehold, that it was just simply to restrain Neely. That's important. That's a fact a jury could look at and say, hey, wait a minute, wasn't the chokehold. One other point I want to make is the prosecution's medical examiner. And I think this is really going to lead to a potential acquittal, if not, then a hung jury.
Okay.
But she testified, Connell, she never looked at the toxicology report before she reached a conclusion. That is devastating. I've taken medical examiner depositions, at least a half a dozen of them. They always look at the toxicology report. They always consider that in cause of death.
So that testimony, there was an expert brought in by the defense from the outside. The prosecutor said, oh, he's just a hired gun, that kind of thing. But that expert witness who was brought in to refute that testimony could be key, is what you're saying, it sounds like.
Yeah, Connell, that expert witness, the medical examiner witness, so the defense brought in their own medical examiner, right? And he testified to two critical things. A, what I just said, that, look, this wasn't a legitimate chokehold. He looked at the videotape and said, that's not a real chokehold. He's leaving some room for Jordan Neely to breathe. That's a critical fact these jurors could look at and say, well, then there's no causation. And then the other factor that I think was really important was he considered the K2. For your viewers, that's synthetic marijuana. It's much more powerful than regular marijuana. He considered the schizophrenia and how your body is going to react to the pressure that's being put on it during this scuffle. And that taken into consideration led this defense medical examiner witness to say that Penny's restraint by the neck was not the cause of Jordan Neely's neck. And I think that testimony alone is going to persuade some of these jurors, if not possibly all of them, that there was no causation.
All right, we're on verdict watch now. We'll see if there's any more notes from this jury. Brian, before you go, in your own neck of the woods today, we have news breaking at this hour that the new DA in Los Angeles is being sworn in, Nathan Hochman. And there's the swearing in. These are live pictures from L.A. He'd run kind of as a middle ground type of guy battling crime and won against George Gascon. Now, we talked about this, of course, because of the Menendez case. But thoughts on the new DA out in your area?
Yeah, Connell, he's more conservative. I think he's registered as a Republican. I have a client who works in the DA's office, and he said that Hochman is going to meet with every single DA that works in that office to kind of refurbish or gentrify the morale within the office, that he is about applying the law, not applying politics. By that, I mean, he's going to have, if enhancements apply to crimes, they're going to be used to get stiffer penalties. And in terms of the Menendez case, Connell, real quick, I think your viewers need to know that regardless of what Hochman says here, like let's say Hochman says, I don't recommend a resentencing because he's a little bit more conservative. This judge has the sole jurisdiction and domain to determine whether there's going to be a resentencing hearing. And I believe that that's going to happen, and there's going to be a rehearing despite what Hochman says. This judge just wants to do what's politically correct. Let's hear what you have to say, Hochman. But this judge is the final arbiter.
Okay, good points all around as always. Thank you. Brian Claypool with us here at 19 past the hour.